I'm Ben Wizner. I'm an attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union. I'm talking to Gavin Hood, the director of the Rendition movie. There are some extremely disturbing images in the film, including some of the most disturbing images I've seen that depict waterboarding. In an interview on 60 Minutes, George Tenet, who used to run our CIA, was asked about the CIA's torture policy, and his first response is, "We don't torture." When asked about waterboarding, he said, "We will not discuss specific methods." When told why harsh interrogation, asked why that was necessary, he said, "Because people have information we need." So that in almost one paragraph, he managed to deny it, refuse to go into details, and then admitted.
You're new to this, aren't you?
It's my first torture.
The United States does not torture.
What do you make of this torture debate in the United States right now?
The answer is, look, I grew up in South Africa. I was at law school during the 1980s, at a time when, repressive legislation was just being advanced every day. We started off with sort of 30-day detention, then it was 90-day detention, without right of access to a lawyer, and then it was ultimately indefinite detention without right of access to a lawyer, without having to notify any of the families. Well, guess what Rendition is?
The agency wanted to be able to move suspected terrorists out of the U.S. to their countries of origin without having to go through the formality of applying for extradition. It's supposed to be used only under extraordinary circumstances.
As a young law student, we would look to the United States Constitution as a document that we felt was something that South Africa desperately needed. And South Africa now does have a constitution modeled in many ways on the American Constitution. The great institutions of this country that have inspired, the world, and many people wanting to have the kind of founding documentation that America has, and now it's all something we can just knock aside, or as Gonzalez says, call the sort of great institutions quaint. The Geneva Conventions are quaint. Right. It's deeply disturbing,
As
quite
if
frankly.
The Geneva Conventions were written by naive people and not people who had just lived through the butchery of 50 million humans.
Exactly, and as if they weren't inspired by great Americans. And one thing I find immensely frustrating is the accusation from the extreme right of anyone who questions torture or the policy of rendition as somehow being unpatriotic. I want to say, excuse me, the defining documents of this country are the Constitution and the principles by which Americans stand, and who's unpatriotic? I mean, how dare someone accuse someone who wishes to support the Constitution of being unpatriotic?
Why don't you ask your boss how badly he really does want to stick his neck out for a terrorist?
Well, he might for due process. Maybe I should have a copy of the Constitution sent to your office.
What I think the purpose of our film is it's aimed at a general audience that is perhaps not familiar with rendition at all, and it taps those major arguments in order to encourage people to debate with one another, to have a good argument, to get a little heated.
One of the real ironies for me as a lawyer who represents rendition victims is that the one place where we've been unable to have that debate is in a federal courtroom. And that our efforts to litigate these issues, to bring the victim stories to courts, have been turned back. We have the CIA coming into courts and saying in private to these judges, these cases must be dismissed because even discussing them, even airing these allegations, will harm national security.
I just don't get it. I mean, we give murderers and rapists and child abusers their day in court. What is happening? What is this? It's so shocking it's hard to talk about, to be honest.
And there's obviously enough information about this program out there that you were able to produce a very realistic motion picture about it. At the same time, millions of people are going to see this motion picture. It seems like the only people who are being shielded from this are our legal system.
Why do you think that is, Ben? I'm sorry to throw it back at you, but as somebody representing, Khalid al-Masri, for example, is someone you represent.
Absolutely. We have times like these in our history, in American history, where the administration in power, in order not to protect national security, but to avoid embarrassment, to avoid accountability, gathers more power to itself. And when you have an administration saying to federal judges, you don't know what we know, trust us here. If you let this case go forward, all kinds of terrible things are going to happen. You don't want that on you, do you? There aren't that many judges who have the courage to stand up for the rule of law.
This is what I don't understand. Judges are educated intellectual people. Why is there this weakness? Why is there this fear of an executive? We as human beings inside know it's wrong. And it just takes really looking at the reality of the program to say, I know it's wrong. And Jake, in a way, represents the audience watching. Right. He's the observer. And ultimately, one hopes that the stomach says, I don't want a part of this. You know, I'm out.
Give me a pie chart. I love pie charts. Anything that outweighs the fact that if you torture one person, you create 10, 100, 1,000 new enemies.
Sometimes I think, how is America going to emerge from this nightmare? Maybe we need to follow your example. Maybe we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Not prosecute everybody, but let the truth come out.
Because the truth is a form of punishment. Those who have done wrong and speak out and forever are on record with their shame, and those who feel that they have been able to have that person. I would like to see Dick Cheney have to apologize to Khalid al-Masri. In a way, if Cheney were prosecuted and yet never had to look al-Masri in the eye, it's almost worse than if he had to actually look al-Masri in the eye before the American public and say, I am so sorry, I was wrong. And mean it, because it's pointless if he doesn't.
Just to imagine Khalid al-Masri receiving that public vindication, which is all that he's ever sought in this lawsuit, and what he's been denied all along. Well, I think that your film is an important part of making Americans confront the truth about some of our recent history.
I'm going to have faith in the 200 years of American constitutional history and the patriotism, frankly, of Americans who really believe that the constitutional government was established here and it's worth fighting for, frankly, and that when our principles are most under threat, it seems to me that's when you most have to stand up for your principles. And I sound very patriotic, and indeed I am, Ben, because this is not an academic exercise for me. It's very real and deeply shocking to see the apathy of so many citizens of a country that is truly great in terms of the way its constitution was originally drafted. So.
Well, I hope Americans understand just how precious it is, what we have and what we risk losing, and I think that your film in its way will be part of that solution. I hope so.
Well, thank you so very much. It was great talking to you, Ben, and all good things for your work with the clients you represent.